Welcome, curious minds. Today, we're jumping right into that crazy whirlwind of current events. The kind of news cycle that makes you feel like you need, I don't know, a PhD just to follow along. So if you've ever wished someone could just hit the highlights reel on, well, everything happening, this deep dive is for you. We've got a stack of sources here covering everything from global power plays and tech giant spats, right down to some pretty impactful local stuff. Our mission today, basically, cut through the static, pull out the stuff that actually matters, and maybe, just maybe, make it make a little more sense with, a few surprising bits thrown in.
Exactly. And it's a really interesting mix you've gathered. We're seeing reports on Donald Trump, Pakistan's army chief, Asim Munir, major things happening in India, the U.S., and of course, the tech world drama never stops. What's kind of fascinating when you look at it all together is how these things that seem totally separate, well, they often link up. They tell a bigger story about power, about information, and honestly, about how unpredictable people can be.
Okay, let's do it. Let's get into this news buffet. Hope you're ready. First up, a man who, let's be honest, practically lives in the headlines. Donald Trump. So our sources are talking about his latest attempts at global peacemaking, specifically this land swap idea for Ukraine and Russia. It sounds less like diplomacy and more like, I don't know, trying to trade properties and monopoly. And he apparently wants a feel-out meeting with Putin in Alaska, and claims he'd know in minutes if we can make a deal.
Right, in minutes. And I think the key thing the sources highlight here is this very direct, almost transactional approach. It's classic Trump, right? The deal maker. But experts in the material point out this often clashes with, traditional diplomacy, which usually involves understanding deep history, culture, stuff that takes more than a few minutes.
Yeah, nuance isn't really the brand, is it?
Not typically, no. It prioritizes a quick result, even if that result might not stick long-term or address the root causes. It's a very different way of operating on the world stage.
Okay, and sticking with Trump for a sec, he's also apparently taking credit for tariffs on India buying Russian oil, saying it's a big blow to Moscow thanks to U.S. trade policy.
And this really shows how economic tools get used like weapons in geopolitics. India is a huge buyer of Russian oil, so it's right in the middle of these complex dynamics. The sources note the U.S. slapped a 50% tariff on India. It's huge, same level as Brazil, apparently. It just underlines the kind of economic pressure being applied.
50%, wow. Okay, so let's pivot now to some different tensions. Pakistan's army chief, Asim Munir. He's been saying some pretty wild things. Our sources report him threatening to target India's Jamnagar refinery. That's a massive energy complex, and even talking about missile strikes on Indian dams if this thing called the Indus Waters Treaty gets suspended.
And that treaty is critical, right? It's been around since 1960, manages river water between India and Pakistan. Hugely important for both countries.
Exactly. And then he apparently also talked about taking half the world down, which, I mean, come on, that sounds like something a cartoon villain would say before being foiled by a talking squirrel.
It really does. But what's striking in the material is the contrast between that kind of extreme rhetoric and what analysts say is the actual military reality. Other sources clarify Pakistan's nuclear posture is really about regional deterrence, mainly aimed at India, not some kind of global suicide mission. There's even a quote from a former Pentagon official calling Munir Osama bin Laden in a suit, which is quite an image.
Wow. Yeah, that paints a picture.
It really highlights the gap between political posturing, saying things for effect, and actual verifiable military capability. You have to separate the two. And India's response, according to the reports, was basically, we won't be intimidated by nuclear blackmail, and calling the comments regrettable.
Okay, and then there's this almost slightly comical side story. India apparently stopped delivering newspapers to Pakistani diplomats in Delhi.
Yeah, as a tit-for-tat move after their diplomats in Islamabad allegedly faced harassment. It just shows how low things can get, Even newspapers become diplomatic weapons.
Incredible. And related to regional security, the U.S. has formally labeled the Balochistan Liberation Army, the BLA, and its alias, the Majid Brigade, as foreign terrorist organizations.
Right, following what the sources call several deadly attacks in Pakistan. And that designation matters. It changes how other countries deal with the group, potentially cutting off support or increasing pressure. It really brings up questions about these non-state groups in regional fights. And the newspaper thing, however small it seems, just underlines the constant tension in the India-Pakistan relationship. Even minor stuff gets caught up in it. Information control, again.
Okay, let's shift gears from global tension to, digital tension. tech drama. Sources say Elon Musk is going after Apple, accusing them of favoring OpenAI in the App Store, threatening to sue the whole nine yards.
Oh, the tech titan tussle never disappoints.
Right. Meanwhile, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman is apparently busy trying to fix ChatGPT after some GPT-5 backlash.
And this whole situation just screams intense competition in the AI world. Control over platforms like the App Store. That's huge leverage. The backlash mentioned in the sources, that seems to be about users worried about AI making stuff up, hallucinations, as they call it, plus ethical concerns, how fast it's all moving. People are getting, understandably, a bit freaked out by how powerful these things are getting.
Yeah, I get that. It feels like we skipped a few steps sometimes.
Exactly. And Musk's complaints. That's about who controls the digital playground, basically, who sets the rules. It's also interesting, the sources mention India is trying to get AI working in 22 different languages. That's a massive challenge, but shows how global this race is.
22 languages, wow.
Yeah, the whole thing really shows humans, creators, users, regulators trying to get their heads around this incredibly powerful new tech.
All right, let's bring it down to earth a bit, some local headlines. And this one, well, it's got people barking mad, literally. The Supreme Court in India ordered the removal of all stray dogs, all of them. And it sparked this huge online debate.
Understandably, animal rights groups are calling it unscientific, basically impossible logistically.
One source said trying to move hundreds of thousands of dogs in Delhi to shelters in weeks is mission impossible. Sounds about right. Like trying to herd cats, but, dogs. And way more of them.
And it puts the spotlight right on that tricky balance between public safety worries about dog bites, rabies, and animal welfare, plus the sheer practical challenge. It's a perfect example of how a court ruling can suddenly create massive real-world problems and ethical debates. How do you actually do that?
Okay, and sticking with India, politically, sources cover opposition leader Rahul Gandhi and others being detained during protests. They were protesting against the election panel, making claims of vote chori, vote theft.
Right, but the election panel itself fact-checked those claims pretty bluntly, labeling them misleading.
Yeah, capital letters and everything. And then actress-turned-politician Kangana Ranaut chimed in, calling the protests political theatrics. Never misses a beat, does she?
It's a classic example of competing stories around elections, isn't it? You have the protests, the claims, the official rebuttal. That misleading label from the commission is interesting. It shows the battle over information itself. Who gets to define what's true? It really makes you think critically about where you're getting your news.
And then back in the U.S., a really tragic story, a blast at a steel plant in Pennsylvania. Killed 2 people, injured 10.
Yeah, and the sources note the plant had a history of pollution concerns, which just adds another layer of tragedy and raises questions about industrial safety oversight.
Definitely. And then a completely different kind of explosion, Trump deploying the National Guard to Washington, D.C. and taking control of the city's police.
Right, claiming there's a crime wave, vowing to liberate D.C. and take our capital back. Strong words.
Sounds like he's auditioning for Batman or something.
Well, it certainly raises big questions about federal power stepping into local city governance. You have clashing views on safety, on what constitutes a crime wave and who should be in charge. That steel plant incident points to ongoing industrial safety issues, while the D.C. situation highlights power dynamics between federal and local authorities. Very different issues, but both involve questions of control and responsibility.
So after all that, wow, what does this all mean for you trying to make sense of this constant flood of news? We've gone from high-stakes global deals or attempted deals down to stray dogs and tech feuds. It is a lot.
It really is.
But hopefully by kind of pulling back the curtain on the sources, looking at the narratives underneath, you get more than just a scary headline. You get some actual insight.
Absolutely. And the sheer range of stories we just talked about, it highlights how difficult it is to actually be well-informed today. There's just so much coming at you. So thinking critically, questioning what you read, looking at different angles, those aren't just nice to have skills anymore. They're essential because underneath all these headlines, you see these recurring themes, right? How power works, how information gets shaped and fought over, and how, individual human actions keep driving events in often unexpected ways.
Yeah, that human element is always the wild card.
Always. It really leads to a big question, doesn't it? In this age of instant news and constant conflicting claims, how do you figure out what's really important and maybe even harder, what's actually true?
Okay, that's our deep dive for today. We really hope you feel a bit less like you're drowning in headlines and a bit more clued in.
Yeah, our goal is always to try and provide that clarity, that context that helps turn just random news items into something you can actually understand and think about.
So next time you're scrolling, maybe pause for a second. Ask not just what happened, but why it might matter. And maybe who benefits from you hearing it that way. It can make a real difference. Thanks for diving deep with us. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed.
And keep asking those questions.